Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where we'll be discussing all the new features from Octopus 2020.6 and 2021.1. Before we move on, just a little bit of housekeeping first. No need to record this webinar today, as we'll be doing that for you, and we'll email a link of the recording out to you early next week. We will have time for some questions at the end of today's presentation. Please use Zoom Q&A to post your questions, or head over to octopus.com/Slack and go into the webinar channel, and we'll pick your questions up there. So, I'm Adam Close, and I'm a solutions architect here at Octopus Deploy. And joining me today is Derek Campbell. How are you today, Derek?
Hey Adam, I'm really good. I'm really looking forward to today's webinar. I think we've got some really cool new features to show off. How about yourself?
Yeah, pretty much the same. It feels like a while since we've done one of these. I think we've got quite a few cool features to show off. So, yeah, looking forward to seeing a few of your demos. So, what's on the agenda today? So firstly, I just want to point out the Octopus release cadence has now changed. So previously, we would release a new version every month. We've now changed that to do a new release every quarter. So we're going to cover off 2020.6 and 2021.1. Now 2020.6 is kind of a transitional release from last year. So the release was part of last year's releases, but it's also our first release of 2021. We'll also cover off 2021.1. So firstly, what came out in 2020.6? Firstly, we had the Octopus Linux container image. We're not going to talk too much on this today, as me and Derek are back in a few weeks' time to go through the ins and outs of that container image. I'm going to show you how to spin that up locally and also deploy that into various different cloud platforms. Octopus has now introduced support for ARM and ARM64 for the Tentacle. We've also introduced a new global search in Octopus. And lastly, we've made a number of changes to API keys, especially around managing them and the expiry. Now, I know Derek is going to be very excited to talk about these changes.
I'm really excited about this one, Adam. The main reason is coming from an ops background, any additional security around API keys. But from a personal perspective, this is something after speaking with a few customers, it's actually a pitch that I wrote up and delivered to the product team. And it's really great to see them, when obviously an idea that you came up with and worked on makes it into the product.
Yeah, and the changes are really great, so it's good to see them in there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to showing that bit off.
As I mentioned before, we're also going to cover off the second release of 2021, which is 2021.1. So we've introduced a new deployment step, the new Azure web app zip deployment. We've introduced some new GitHub actions, some better support around using GitHub actions and the integration with Octopus Deploy. And probably the most exciting one for me is the project import and export. I'm not going to take too much of Derek's thunder because he's going to show you this in a second in a demo. But we have the ability to import and export projects between spaces, which is really exciting to see.
I'm really excited about that one as well. It's actually
Me
the
too.
first bit I'm going to show off on my demo.
Yes, I think I remember when I first started at Octopus, it's something you've been kind of crying out for. So we finally got there.
Yeah, definitely, because I was here when we launched Spaces back in January 2019. And it really does complement, that's one of the Spaces is fantastic, but having the ability to move spaces from your default space into other spaces using a built-in tool is always a good thing.
Yeah, hopefully we see some more usage of spaces now we have that feature.
Definitely.
And then lastly, we're not going to cover anything in kind of demo, but I really want to kind of talk about this. As part of the 2021.1 release, we've been making some huge improvements to our Octopus Cloud product. So firstly, we are increasing the storage limit up to 1 terabyte. So anybody who's starting packages in Octopus Cloud, is hitting any barriers, you know, um, You've got 1 terabyte of storage now to play with, which is great news. We've also increased the task cap. Now, anybody who's not Octopus Cloud know there'll be a generic task cap of 5. We're increasing that so you're able to run more tasks in parallel and kind of get more performance out of Octopus Cloud. And then lastly, we're introducing a new control panel for Octopus Cloud, which will make that much easier to manage your cloud instance. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Derek, who's going to take a few demos of the new features.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. So let's jump in, Adam, and let's do some demos. So we're going to start with project import export, which is funny. I actually think it should be called project export import because you have to export something before you can import it. So those who have joined our webinars recently, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the project that I use on our last one with Gregor Suti. So in this one, I deployed Octopus Shop using Azure DevOps, Platform as a Service. So as you can see here, we've got the Azure service and we're on the webinar instance. What we're going to do is we're going to jump over to the same webinar instance, which is running on cloud, and then there's a release space. So what I'm going to do is let's just jump in quickly. We can have a quick look. You can see that you've got a deployment process that's happened. So you've got your deployment process, you've got your run books, you've got your channels and so forth. So to export this, let's select projects. We then select the little button at the top right hand corner. We then select export projects. So in this instance, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to select the project that we can do, and then I'm going to password protect it. Okay, and there we go. Select export. At this point, what is going to happen is a task is going to run, which is going to grab all the information about that project. So you can see here that the task has not started yet. And there we go. So you've got a zip file and a JSON file. This is something so you can actually download this zip file and then import it into another one. In this instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to our release space. I'm going to select the same option to import projects. And then from here, we're going to, so again, if you did download that zip file, what you can do is select zip and then the drag and drop appears. So you can just drop your zip in. In this instance, because it's the same space, I'm just going to select the export task. So select Azure. There we go. Select the export. We select Octopus Shop. As you can see, we've done this a few times. So just testing everything out, and then select input the. You also have to input the password. So one thing just to check, you can see just before importing it, you do have an import preview. So in this instance, we are bringing in Octopus Shop, the Azure test account, the prod account, etc., the environments, the life cycles, the channels, and also even the runbooks. And it's also even pulling in the worker pools. So select import. So effectively what it does do is anything that's associated with the project, it imports. And one of the key things is you can do this over the API. So if you had several projects to do it, I would probably test it with a manual import export. And then from there, I would definitely try and test it over the API. Because once you start moving, then yeah, it's generally a little bit easier. And also what you can do is you can use this to move over to a cloud project. So what you'll see is there is a slight difference, and that's just something to be aware of. As the slight difference here is you'll notice that the logo it hasn't been brought across. So that's just something to be aware of. The logo doesn't come across with the project. Anything that's stored at the package level, at the folder level, isn't brought over. So you'll notice there's no packages. It is just a project tool, and you can see again you've got your release. I just like to clean these up because you can, if you jump in and have a look at the releases, it's actually looking for packages that don't exist. So just as a general rule, you want to clean up any releases before you start using it. So there we go. We've got our Octopus shop. In this instance, we obviously don't have the logo, but we have the deployment process. And for those who were on the last webinar, this is what we were doing is deploying Octo Pet Shop, which consists of 4 different projects. It has the database, the web app, and the product service web app. And then lastly, the shopping cart service, and this is all underpinned by an MS SQL database. So this is all we're doing. We're just deploying 3 web apps and an Azure SQL database. One thing that we will have to do is change it over to the new web app step, but let's show off one thing at a time. So what we've now got is with the new Azure web app step, one of the main benefits is that you can deploy to Linux. So by default, when working with web apps within Azure, the default is normally Windows. In this instance, this is no longer the case. So what you can now do is you can deploy .NET Core to Linux web apps. You can do Node as well, and I will show all that off in just a moment. But in this instance, I am going to have to make some changes. The main reason we have to do some changes is the runbooks that we have used and imported from the other space are using Linux app service plans. One of the things that you do have to be aware of when you're using app service plans, which contain Azure web apps, you can only run it. So if you decide to run your app service plan as Linux, then all your app services have to be on Linux. Similar to the app service plan when it comes to Windows, it has to also be, the app services also have to be Windows. So thankfully, what I've done is there's a few changes that I have to make, thankfully. So we'll come down here, let's edit the source code. So there's a few things. You can see here we've got the OS type, so I'm just going to remove the option for Windows. I'm going to then make it a Linux. And then I just need to switch the reserve to true. Okay, so here we go. That says now, what should now happen is this runbook is going to provision all of the infrastructure for us. One of the things that I love about runbooks is, you can actually use it to provision. So let's publish the runbook. There's a few reasons why we need to publish it. One of them is just making sure that we've tested it. What I'm doing is updating it because I've updated the variable. Then effectively what's actually happened there is I need to republish it for it to use that new variable which I've updated. So select run. So in this instance, I'm going to select development, and I'm going to select run. So now what this is going to do is going to go and create the resource group, the Azure SQL Server, the empty database, then the app service plan, which should be Linux. Then we're going to create the app service, the product service, register it with an Octopus, perform the health check, and then do that for all of the steps so that at the end we have the ability to deploy to this infrastructure. Okay, so whilst that's happening, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about GitHub Actions. So, Adam, what are GitHub Actions?
Yeah, great question. So I'm not going to go on and pretend to be a GitHub Actions expert. It's something I'm still picking up. But essentially, GitHub Actions wraps up all your CI/CD pipelines into some tidy YAML files. Essentially, you can run your build and deployment pipelines as code. First thing, one of the things to mention is it's free to start off with. There's no setup of build agents. It's kind of all done for you in GitHub Actions, all done by GitHub. And one of the great things about it when I first picked this up is it's still quite scary to sometimes pick up a new scripting language. I don't know what you think about this, Derek. It's quite scary to pick up a new scripting language.
I find,
However, GitHub Actions quite make it quite easy with a lot of templates and sample workflows that you can use. So if anyone's on this thinking, oh, it's not something else I want to kind of pick up, GitHub Actions made it fairly easy to get up and running with your applications.
Definitely, definitely. And the thing is so we've just released our first one. We normally have for our build servers like TeamCity, Azure DevOps, etc. We normally have an extension. In this instance, all the action is doing is installing the Octopus CLI. So you can see here, and then what you're then doing is hand rolling it. With GitHub Actions, all using YAML, which is yet another markup language. The thing that you do need to be aware of is it's so reusable. So once you actually set this up, you could export this and it becomes very reusable. So in this instance, I have created this. So obviously I have used YAML. You probably found that I am not a massive fan of YAML. I love it and dislike it in the same breath. The main thing I like about it is the reusable factor of it. It's super reusable, whereas obviously if you have to use a user interface, you can't really reuse that, or it's at least very clunky. So let's jump in and see what we're doing with GitHub Actions. So what we've got is we've created our GitHub folder, our workflow folder, and then created our YAML. So what we've got is we've just called this .NET Core Build. We've got some pull requests. This is based on the main. You can set things like cron task, so this runs every morning at 7 a.m. Some log level bits. Let's be honest, this is where the fun really starts. And let's just zoom in a little bit. So what we've got here is this is when we're starting to set things. So in this instance, we're setting the version which is defined by the date. So that's year, month, and day. Then we're specifying a name and then some uses. So what we're doing here is we're specifying the version of .NET. We're then doing a restore. We're then building it using the configuration, the release configuration. And from here, we'll run some tests. And then the next bit, we're starting to create some folders. We're then doing .NET publishing the 4 different projects. So that's the database, the website, the product service, and so forth. And then this is when you start actually using Octopus commands. So in this instance, you're using the CLI. And what this is doing is we're then specifying octopack. And then what this is doing is creating the package name octopus samples.octopetshop.database. So you're specifying this as a format, the version, so forth, and then we can scroll. And then we've got even the artifacts. So what we've then got is we're packaging everything up. And then, so we'll see here. So we've got the pack, and then we're pushing. So you'll see everything here is a push. And then what you'll see is there's the server ID is actually secrets.octopus server URL, right? And then, so to get this, you can actually use secrets within GitHub Actions. But one thing just before, one thing I want to call out is the Octo create release. What you can also do is you could also have deploy release. The main reason we don't have this just now is I'm pulling this all as one demo, and unfortunately I am going to kick off this before development might have finished, so I just don't want to kick off a deployment that may not work. Okay, so at that point we've went through the GitHub action. So one thing just to be aware of is you come over to settings, and then in settings you can set your secret. Let's come down, we'll select our secrets. Okay, so there we go. We come down, and so we can set as many secrets as you wish. In this instance, I've set the API key, the URL, and the space, all the secrets. And then this is something that I can update as part of any GitHub action. So to run them, you come over in GitHub to the within the repository and select the actions. So there we go. As you can see here, we have run this recently. But whilst that's happening, let's jump over and just check. Oh, there you go, actually. It has actually deployed all of the infrastructure. So at that point, let's kick off the action. So we're going to come down here. We're going to select the action. You can obviously, you can have this to automatically run. In this instance, just to control how this is working, what I've now done is I'm just doing this manually. So I've select run workflow. What we should see, sometimes you just need to, just before, we will just get reload the page. Sometimes this just takes a moment. There we go. So let's go in and check it out. Give it a second. So yeah, that's it kicked off. Let's jump in. Okay, so as you can see here, that YAML now is kicked off and it's running through the code. So it's set the version. It's now setting up the dependencies, which is it's just doing a restore. It's then now going to do the test. It's doing the build. It's creating the artifacts folder. It's pushing the artifacts into that folder. And then it's then publishing it. And then what's now going to do, it's now going to grab up some of those files and it's now actually going to push those up to Octopus. So here we go. There we go. You've got to love that little octopus icon, Adam?
Yeah, I can see that there. I didn't notice that before.
Yeah, that's a new one actually. That is a new one. But yeah, so what we're now doing is we've actually the database has now been pushed. So yeah, and there's the product service, there's the shopping cart service, which is all great. And then at the bottom, you can see the server, the API key, and the space. That's all hidden, so that will never be shared again. And then it's created a release. So at this point, let's say jump back to Octopus. So what we should see now, if we go into the overview page. So there we go. So we've got 2021, 528 all created. So at this point, we're thinking, let's hit deploy, but let's not. The main reason I say that is you select your process. You'll notice here that we're using the old Azure Web App step. So this will load, and then what you're going to see is it's this bit here. It will say here on the screen, deploy an Azure Web App, and then in brackets, web deploy. So what we're now going to do is we're going to select this. We're going to then select disable. Right, there we go. And lastly, we're just going to disable that last step. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to select add step. And then what we're going to do is we're going to type in web app. You can also select Azure. And then what you're going to see is you've got two options. You've got the web deploy version, and then you've got the Azure App Service one. This is the new one that supports Linux, Node, Java, Linux containers, and everything in between. So there we go. So we're going to do deploy Octopet Shop Web App. Okay, so there we go. I'm just going to have this on our worker. Then it's going to run on behalf of the web. There we go. Do this. So you do have container images, so you can, again, you've still got execution containers. You can also select your package, so that's a zip, Java war file, or a NuGet package, and you can even select it from deploying a container image straight onto an Azure Web App as well. Again, you've got the same support for deployment slots, so you can use blue-green deployments or staging slots. You can specify your application settings in JSON. You can do your connection strings, configuration files. So you can do all your normal substitution, your .NET configuration transforms, all that sort of good stuff. So select save. At this point, what we should see is, yeah. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to clone this, and then I'm going to clone this twice. And you'll probably guess what I'm doing is I am cloning it twice, one for the product service, one for the shopping cart service.
I can imagine our first feature request for this, Derek. A migration from the old web deploy to the new step.
Yeah.
I wonder who's going to write a script for that. I wonder who's going to first do it.
I think I'm busy that day. But yeah, no, I think you're actually, I think you're pretty spot on. It is something that you are going to have to change, unfortunately. But at the same time, is it's something you can also change over time, I think.
Yeah, it's probably worth noting that we've got this new step, but there's no point to depreciate the existing web deploy step.
Yeah, that's it. I think the thing is as well, the thing that I've generally seen with the deploy step is a um you have to have it on Windows. And one of the things you can't actually deploy from Octopus before this version. So that's one of the main benefits is you can now do it to Linux. And you will save. I think it's something like 20% or something along those lines that you can save.
It's a good number.
Yeah.
And also, on my side, I do a lot of Java, as you know, a lot of Java and Tomcat deployments. Octopus. Be able to deploy WAR to an Azure App Service is great
You've
news.
got to, love that. Because you're obviously with you being a Java guy, you spend a lot of time in virtual machines, don't you?
Yes, and a lot of Linux. There are a lot. There's platforms and services out there, but I do get very jealous of deploying .NET Core to Azure App Service. How easy it is. Be able to deploy WAR files now from Octopus has certainly made that a lot easier.
Definitely, definitely. I think anything really that makes your deployment process easier is always going to be good.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we've now got is we've moved over this. So we've got our website. This is running on a direct worker. The package is the web package. So yeah, that's looking good. What we are going to do though, one thing just to make things a little bit quicker, is we are actually going to use a start trigger. So we are going to run all of these steps in parallel. You've got to love a little bit of some additional speed.
Yeah, take advantage of that new task cut, Derek, in cloud.
Oh, well, I won't lie. The minute I heard about the new enterprise caps, this instance got upgraded within about 20 minutes. And one of the benefits of being an Octopus employee. Okay, so yeah. Oh, that still seems to have the website. Let's just update that. That's the product service, which is great. And then we're just going to update that so that it runs in parallel. Again, yes, all of the tasks, all of the time. Oh, looks like I've forgotten to update the name of this. So that's the Octo Pet Shop shopping cart service. Oopsie daisy. And then in we go. So again, what we've got here, you've got the on behalf of the shopping cart service, and then I've got the package. I just forgot to rename that. So select save. Okay, so that is now good to go. So at this point, yeah, so we'll jump on over to Azure. Let's have a look at the app service plans. What I'm hoping to see here, Adam, is that we have actually created a Linux web app as app service plan.
Yeah, hopefully. Actually, a little
Yeah,
slow.
there we go. So it is running a little bit slow. So let's so what I do is I use system variables a lot in my when I'm creating things. So as you can see, there we go. We've got a release 2021-1-Octo Pet Shop, which is the name of the project, and then development, which is the name of the environment. And as you can see, it's Linux. So now what we want to do is actually let's just make sure, let's run that GitHub action again. The main reason is I think the old deployment process may still be in place. So let's just rerun that just to be certain. There we go. So this is, again, this is one of the things I really like about it, is that it's so fast, Adam. It really is fast.
Yeah, very surprised how quick that ran. Also there as well, the branching. If you create any feature branch, you can just slightly change the build and potentially the package names. It's going to different channels in Octopus.
Yeah.
Great things.
There's some, I think that's the thing though, it is, and also that's the thing, you can have multiple different ones. So really it's, you can have multiple workflows that do very different things. And you said earlier on about the template. So say if you did want to select a new workflow, what does that look like? Let's actually in this instance, probably zooming out might help. So what we've now got is for instance, if it's .NET or .NET Desktop, you want to deploy to ECS, IBM, OpenShift, Terraform. There's lots of really great stuff there that you can use. What's your favourite one, Adam?
So the last one I've actually used is actually on screen at the moment. Is when I was deploying Node.js app.
Nice.
I'm not have huge experience with Node.js. So especially when it comes to building, so having that there was perfect for me. But yes, I do a lot of as you know, Java builds.
Yeah,
So anything to help me out with that is also my favorite.
always a good thing. So okay, so let's have a look, see if this is generated. There we go. Let's do a deployment. So this is now doing the deployment, and this is using the new Azure Web App step. So at this point, it's going to run through, you'll see here, it's going to acquire the packages, and then it's going to deploy all four of these in parallel. Let's have a quick look at that. So yeah, that's what it's now doing, is just passing that over. And this is one of the things with the new approach, it's very fast that I find. And what I found with the web deploy approach is sometimes it was a little bit buggy. Sometimes
Yeah,
you saw obviously locked files, etc. Ultimately, it is using web deploy. So obviously, whatever bugs web deploy had, Octopus web deploy also had that for the web app.
yeah. That's I'm glad you said that. No, I've dealt with a couple of issues with file locking. There are some workarounds. So even if one of the big benefits you mentioned is deploying to the Linux app service, even if you weren't just using Windows, um, it does eradicate, if you use the zip deploy, it does eradicate some of those issues around file locking, which we do see from time to
Yeah.
time. So if you haven't got a use case of moving to Linux, it's something to look at if you've ever bumped into any issues around the file locks.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the Azure Web App Steps. I think with that, it's generally something that I've seen before, where you can get those locking, and I think with the new zip deployment, it does work so much better. So whilst you were talking about that, I came over in into my user account, and I'm going to show off some of the API improvements that we've got. So you'll see for the eagle-eyed amongst us, you've got the demo here. You've got the API key, and you've got the first few characters. That's one of the benefits. But one of the other things is also the expiry. I don't know about you, Adam, but I generally find that I set up a deployment. I set up an API key, and then I never reuse it. I always have that single usage of it, right? And I think that's something that it generally probably reflects mostly on me, but I think that probably happens fairly regularly. So how do you do your API keys?
Yeah, pretty much the same, especially when I'm testing a lot on my local instance. Um, you can go through my API keys and you'll just see probably over, I'm probably embarrassed to say this, over 100 API keys with not very good descriptions. Because what I do, I create the key. And a perfect example is I'm testing adding a new polling deployment target. And for that, you need an API key. I'm just trying to test something really quickly. I create a key, paste that into the deployment target setup, and it's gone. I never save it. Um, so then next time I do it, I do an API key for registering deployment targets. I probably should give them a better description, but I can never link them back to what API key is which. So for me, what you're doing now to be able to set an expiry when I deployment targets would be great because I only need it for that one day. So I can set the expiry for the next day. So I think I'm pretty much like you do it.
Yeah, and it's funny because what I'm doing just now is I'm generating an API key and then setting a custom date. You do have, say, 30, 60, 90 days, and then 180, 1 year, 2 years. But what I like is custom. This has a very specific use case and it automatically expires on the 7th, which happens to be the last run of this webinar. So as you can see, my API key is on screen. I'm just going to close that and then instantly delete it. So yeah, just obviously anybody out there, please don't try and use that. that's just one thing just to be aware of. And you can again do this for service accounts. And one thing just to be aware of as well, so you can set the expiry. You can also see a little bit of the API key to help track which one it is. And then with the subscriptions, we also have an API key expiry event. So what we've now got is you can come into subscriptions, you've got your events, and then by default we have the expired event, we have the 10-day warning, and then the 20-day warning. So that's definitely something that I would recommend, and that's just something to do that. So that's definitely something that I would recommend for yourself at least, so that if you are using that, then obviously everything. Then you can track it, you can see when it's going to expire, you can be notified about it. And there we go, we've got a successful deployment. So let's jump in. So as we can see, if we come in here, well, there we go, we've got our step. So we've acquired the packages, we've uploaded it, we've done the database, we've deployed the database, we've then deployed the dev, the web app, the product service app, and then the shopping cart service app as well. And then do that. So you can then deploy to test. In this instance, I haven't spun up any test infrastructure. So yeah, so what I've done there is I've taken an existing project, I've then exported it, imported it into a new space, I've then updated that with some variables to then do a deployment to a Linux web app deployment, app service. I've then obviously moved that over to the new Azure web app step, and then deployed it. So with that, that's all in Linux. We now have a working website, which is really great news. And then just last couple of little bits. We jump over, I was mentioning about the GitHub Actions, we then kicked that off. With the CLI side of things, what you can do is you can actually do things like you could list machines as well. So with the GitHub action. And obviously, as you've seen as well, things hopefully should be a little bit quicker. I've actually got the increased capacity, even though I don't have as much as that. But yeah, so one just last thing that I'd like to do is let's jump over to the liquid base space. I'm going to do another import export. So let's jump into projects. We can do export projects. So I guess, so in this instance, what you can do, look, so obviously we've done the single one, Adam. We're going to put a password again. Yeah, and then let's do 2 projects. I've not done this before, actually. I wonder if this
This goes.
There we go. So obviously here you've got one zip, and then it's a JSON file. So let's.
It's probably worth noting as well. There we go. It's worth noting as well.
Yeah.
Why you get that zip. So obviously you're using the UI there to kind of import and export. You're not actually downloading the zip. The zip becomes useful when you're migrating a project, import and export a project from one Octopus instance to another. A great use case for this is kind of if you are an on-premise Octopus user, you got your own server installation, and you want to move to cloud, especially now we always do fancy task cat limits. You can actually slowly migrate your on-premise installation, all your projects on Octopus, into your cloud instance, and it's self-service.
Yeah.
We did have that pathway before. However, you did have to get in touch with our support team. I'm not too sure the details. You might know more about than me, Derek.
Yeah.
But I think it was a little bit of a pain.
It was, to be honest. What we had was you'd have to book a calendar invite with our support team. You would basically you'd work with our support team and on board. You would generally not be able to deploy for 24 hours, so weekend works and stuff. It wasn't great. And I think this is where we will see so many more people coming across. And there we go. We've got our DVD rental. Sean would be very proud. So yeah.
Yeah, very fast there as well. I don't want to brag too much. But that did do 2 projects pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm really impressed. To be honest, and if you look at some of the zips, the Octo Pet Shop one, I think when I looked at it, was 37 kilobytes. So it's not a massive amount of data. That is obviously, it's a very low, it's a lightweight one. So obviously like that. there is a few bits. And just one last thing as well is the global search. So this is something that's been around for a little while now. So this is something you can do it to, say for instance, you can search it for accounts. You can even use it to add things. So for instance, add deployment target. There we go. So just basically, you'll see here, if you just select add, and then at that point, you can see you can add a new worker, new user role, external feed. One thing it doesn't do is projects. So that's just something to be aware of. You can't search projects, but you can, obviously, this is where the little project switcher really does help out as well.
It's great for new users. Would you
Yeah.
say so, Derek? If you're new to Octopus, so some of the features of adding resourcing to Octopus, I wouldn't say hidden in some menus, but you do have to click through a couple of menus. If you're new to Octopus and you don't really know where things are, but you know you need to add a deployment target or add an account,
Yeah.
that search is great for that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well though is it also generally simplifies things. So like, when in the past doing bulk operations, it wasn't great. In this instance, for bulk operations, use the API, but you can also then start using this
Mhm.
because so the search is more than just a search. It is also a tool that you can use to configure
Mhm.
things such as deployment targets, workers, accounts, and everything in between. Well, unfortunately, that's the end of today's webinar. Okay, so let's go and see if there's any questions. Actually, Adam, one moment. One thing just to be aware of, this is just a shout out to one of our technical partners, ClearMeasure in the US. They actually worked with us on the new zipped web app step. So obviously, one of the things I just wanted to do a shout out to Chris Thomas at ClearMeasure for really helping deliver that new zipped web app step. It's definitely going to improve things going forward. So, Adam, what questions do we have?
Yes, we have a few questions for you, Derek. uh, Firstly, what about importing of dependent library variable set? So I suppose that's a question of, can you export a library variable set from one space to another, maybe?
Yeah, no, definitely. So we've actually just published a blog on this, which actually goes through exactly what is included. So when you're this will basically when you're exporting the project, you'll take along your environment, your tenant, your variable sets. So that's your project and also your library variable sets. And then your step templates, accounts, and certificates. One thing just to let people know is deployment targets. These will need to be added, and then packages. One thing just to be aware of is also we don't copy the packages over. So that's just something to be aware of. You will have to either re-upload the packages or move those over.
Cool, thank you, Derek. This one goes back to one of our first slides. What is a task cap and how has it been increased?
Great question. This is something, the task cap side of things is something, so for instance, in a hosted instance, you come into configuration and then you would see your tasks in here. The task is a way for Octopus to effectively say how many deployments it can do at the same time. By default, Cloud only has 5. What we've done in the new release is we've activated the ability to scale past 5 to 10, 15, 20, etc. At the moment, it is still manual. So if you are seeing problems, please do raise it with support@octopus.com, and that's something that we can do. It is something hopefully that we are looking to improve as well, so it would be more of a dynamic thing.
Cool, thanks for that, Derek. That's something we haven't kind of brought up in the webinar today. Something's we noticed in our docs. What's happened to the Octopus Windows container?
Great question. Right, so Octopus Cloud runs on a Linux container. So we ported this over about 2 years ago now. What you do need to think about is when no one really is using Windows containers. We run into so many problems. I believe at one point there was no networking stack. kind of important to be able to connect to it. So what we've done is we've deprecated Windows. We don't foresee there being a Windows container, not anytime soon. And what we're finding is almost all containers run in some flavor of Linux. So this is why we've, because we run our Octopus via Octopus using Terraform scripts, and it all runs on the Azure Kubernetes service using Linux.
Cool. Thank you, Derek. Last question. So would the new zip deploy step resolve some of the file locking issues in Azure Web Deploy we've seen?
Yeah. So some of the things I've saw some bugs with the old step. It actually wasn't to do with the step or what we do at Octopus. Most of the issues that we have seen is actually within Web Deploy. One of the main reasons why we're now using this new zipped step. So yeah, what you should find is this is a much easier experience, and the good thing is it does the Linux, the Windows app, you can effectively run anything on it. But yeah,
Okay, thank you for that, Derek. That's it. Questions. I'll just double check, make sure we don't have any more. That's it for now. Great questions there.
Excellent.
Cool. So yeah, thank you for that demo, Derek, and answering those questions. So before we finish, just a couple of other little updates that we want to kind of announce. So we have our Octopus community library where customers and Octopus staff can contribute to the steps library. So a couple of ones that we want to highlight. First of all, we've got HashiCorp Vault support and Azure Key Vault support now. So in Octopus, you can obviously store sensitive passwords and all those kind of things in variables, but you may be set on some kind of secret manager already. If that's HashiCorp or Azure Key Vault, you can now integrate using some community steps. Shout out to my colleague, Mark Harrison, for introducing those. And then another community step, deploy child Octopus deploy project. A little bit of a mouthful there, but what it's going to help you do is give you better release management around some of your projects in Octopus. So if you have a project for, let's say, if you've got a application stack of a web API, web UI, and a Windows service, the deployed child Octopus deploy project community step will actually help you manage those better. One of the great things I've seen with it is auto-approving releases for a later date. So if you are kicking off a release at 5 p.m., it's not going to go until 2 a.m. But that release, that's when the deployment process actually needs approval. You can actually get that approval earlier on in the day, so the update can just roll out at night without any intervention. And lastly, we've also made some great changes to our high availability docs. It's actually a new section. So if you're running a single node Octopus instance at the moment and thinking about moving to HA, check those docs out. We have some detailed guides how to move over to AWS, Azure, and also updated our on-premise guides. So cool. Derek, thank you for the demo today and answer those questions again. Just before I wrap up, a couple of things I want to mention. We've got two events coming up. First of all, myself and Derek are back in a few weeks with running Octopus using a Linux container. That will be on June 16th, 17th, and 21st. And then we also have CI/CD in the cloud with Octopus and TeamCity Cloud on June 30th, July 1st, and the 5th. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, everybody else, for joining.
Thank you.